Good morning once again, everyone, and welcome to another round of sound. This is the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. I'm your ringmaster, Bob Pompeani, and we have a lot to get into tonight. As you can imagine, this conversation will be dominated by the Steelers and where they are, plummeting all the way to 8th in the AFC after a loss today in New Orleans. So that will be the #1 topic on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. And here is your panel, left to right on your television screen. They'll be here, and they are anxious to go. We got COLIN DUNLAP, who normally is in bed right now, but he's up, along with Chris Mack. They're the bookends there, you see, on 93.7 The Fan Morning Show, and they're both here. Who's manning the ship?
Yeah, don't worry about it. Not us.
Okay,
Colin will be there.
In the middle, this is a Josh Yohe sandwich, because in the middle is Josh Yohe from The Athletic, who does such a wonderful job covering the Penguins as the beat writer. So we have a lot to get into, and of course that outcome today dropped the Steelers from in control of their fate to on the outside looking in. So the first question, Colin, I'll start with you. What was the biggest reason why they lost this game today?
Coaching. 2 spans of time, I think. The fake punt was atrocious. It was awful. It made no sense. And inserting Stephen Ridley into the football game. I think both of those things that were coaching decisions really, really derailed the Steelers' chances. You can get into the officiating, and obviously it did play a part. But I think that Mike Tomlin came out of it and looked really bad in 2 enormous situations. The fake punt is inexcusable. Just leave your offense on the field if you want to go for it. And then Stephen Ridley, listen, I understand if you want to try to run the ball a little bit, even though you've been gouging them through the air, but do it with Jalen Samuels or hand it to Rosie Nix. To give it to Ridley, I thought was inexcusable, and he should never touch the football as a Pittsburgh Steeler again. He should be finished.
I hate to echo the same thing you're saying there, Colin, just because it doesn't make for much for conversation, but I will agree. Coaching played a large part in this. If we want to start to dig into some other issues, you can talk about the defense again, late in the game, not standing up when they had to. You can talk about the officiating, certainly. I thought the first 2 New Orleans Saints touchdowns came directly off of terrible pass interference calls. But when you boil it down, you distill it down to its essence, it's Mike Tomlin making poor decisions today.
Yeah, I can't ignore the officiating, and I hate to go there, but I thought the Steelers played about as good of a game as you could play given the team they were playing against, the environment they were playing, and they weren't perfect, but they were pretty close. I thought they deserved to win the game. The 2 calls on Joe Hayden, especially the first one, that is one of the worst pass interference calls I have ever seen. It was a 4th and 1. Breeze was just throwing the ball up for grabs because they had nothing. Not that that should matter, but it was a terrible call. I keep going back to that. Even that first touchdown, if the Saints don't score there, who knows how that changes the game. But the Steelers have every reason to be unhappy with the officiating. And one other thing, Bob, still 2 more turnovers. As good as the offense was today, this team has turned the ball over all season long. They did it again today. They could not afford to do it against a team as good as the New Orleans Saints.
All right, let's revisit the fake punt here, since we brought it up first. And just because, Colin, you made a point to me, and it's a good one.
Well,
Vince Williams was out with an injury, and I don't know if Mike Tomlin trusted what he had in there. At the same time, if there was a time to trust your defense, it would have been today. They had, after that first drive of the second half, they had really shut down the Saints offense. So punt them deep. I never crossed my mind that a fake punt would be called.
I agree with you.
Which is also the part of making a successful play like that. It's a surprise element. If it had worked, it would have changed the narrative here altogether.
I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm not. I'm saying that it was wholly wrong what he did, and absolutely an abhorrent decision. But I'm telling you, I think that Mike Tomlin may have thought when Vince Williams left the game with an injury, we got all the stops we could get. I'm going to go for it here and try to do something because Vince Williams had left the football game, and I don't know if I could stop him again without Vince Williams. I'm not saying I agree with it at all. Actually, I disagree with it. But I'm going to say that that's probably how Mike Tomlin's going to try to validate this decision, which is a ridiculous decision.
Yeah, and if that's the case, if we're still at the point, and can you blame the guy for not trusting in his defense in crunch time?
Yeah, but they were playing well at that point,
No, I agree. I agree. I'm not saying I agree with the decision. Much like Colin just said, I don't agree with the decision, especially on your side of the field. Look, there's no reason Mike Tomlin, and I know this delves into a deeper conversation, but Mike Tomlin, Keith Butler, et al., the entire defensive staff, a defensive head coach, should still be at this point in the season not trusting their defense in crunch time. I understand it's the New Orleans Saints. It's Drew Brees. Maybe you can look at it and say, well, they're going to score anyway. At that point, you punt the thing, you make them drive the length of the field, or if you're going to go for it on 4th and 5, you keep your quarterback in the game. The fake just makes no sense.
And by the way, it's astounding to me how often Mike Tomlin is the central figure when the Pittsburgh Steelers lose football games.
Oh, tune into my
I'm not a
postgame
Tomlin
show.
hater. I think he's a good coach, but this has not been a good season for him. This has not been a good month for him, and it was not a very good look today. His team played really well. You don't make yourself the central figure with 5 minutes left in a game like that when your team is close to pulling off what would have been one of the great victories, really, of the Tomlin era.
Something I don't understand that's just as big as that. Stephen Ridley, Bob, went a month and a half without getting a snap. He was dressed, and if you look at the participation chart, and he just stood there. I don't understand the need to make sure he was in the football game. Like, what was it? Like, this isn't Little League where everybody got to play a couple innings or whatever. Why did Stephen Ridley get in the football game?
I was surprised.
Why?
I was too, and he has a history of fumbling.
Correct.
So
well,
that's the wrong time to put him
especially
in
with
there.
a head coach who we've all talked about loves to run the wheels off his feature back, whoever it may be. And Jalen Samuels had proved himself over the last couple of weeks of being up to the task. So you're right. There's no reason to insert Stephen Ridley at that point.
By the way, they threw the ball 50 times in this game and very, very well. It was 3rd and 2. It wasn't 3rd and inches. How about give Ben Roethlisberger the ball and let him win the game?
Well, you can dissect the play calling after, the first 2 drives were all pass. Ben Roethlisberger had completed a lot of passes for 140 yards the first 2 of those drives in the second half. And then all of a sudden they run the ball 5 out of 7 plays, I believe it was. And again, if you're doing it with Jalen Samuels, I can understand that. If you're doing it with Stephen Ridley, I think it's a whole different story. And I think they had talked all week about this team punching out balls. That's all they do, which leads us to turnovers. Because once again, this is going to be the story of the season as well. So, Chris, when you look at the number of turnovers in a game you knew they couldn't make any, Juju Smith-Schuster included. I give him props for playing because I didn't think he would. He did, played well, but he was trying too hard at the end.
Well, this is a guy who's he's been your number 1 receiver, or 1B to Antonio Brown's 1A much of this season. I'm not going to bury him for this because he's got a long career in front of him, but this is one that's going to hang with him for a long while, as well it should. And hopefully, you hope it's one of those things in a young guy's career, a young guy that you want to root for, that doesn't end up being an issue, that he's able to put this behind him and move forward, because they're going to need him to be in the right headspace, the right mind frame moving forward if they're able to sneak into the playoffs next year moving forward. Juju Smith-Schuster is at the core of this offense for years to come. This can't be something that sticks with him. That's up to him to go ahead and continue to move forward positively, because you hate to see it happen again to a guy that I think everybody roots for.
Yeah, he has to hold on to the football. There's no discussion to be had, because I honestly think Boswell would have made a kick. The way it had been going. He looked true. He looked good today. But he has to hold on to the football. Obviously, that's an enormous point in the football game. But I think something that it doesn't necessarily get forgotten about, the 3 points they gave up right before half in 40 seconds right down the field ended up being gigantic.
Yeah.
And that was inexcusable on the defense's part. But Juju has to hold on to the football.
Certainly wasn't. I feel bad for Juju. It was an effort play. He's trying to get the extra yard, but he'll learn from this. It's situational football. And the 2-minute offense in that situation, you don't fight that hard for a yard. When you go down, you're down. You're in a hurry to get to the next playoff. He's had a wonderful season, and he was really good today. He was playing hurt, but it's the story of these Steelers. As talented as they are offensively, they keep shooting themselves in the foot. We saw it week 1 in Cleveland. If James Conner doesn't fumble, they win that game. We're talking about a completely different story.
Yeah, no question. And they're a very talented team. You could have argued if they won that game, they'd be on a roll and maybe the hottest team, but they hurt themselves more than any team in the AFC this year. We will continue this conversation. We're going to talk about Mike Tomlin, his staff, what happens in the offseason. We'll get into officiating as well. But what's the most anticipated year-end matchup, you ask? It's matching you up with the car, truck, or SUV of your dreams at #1 Cochran's big year-end wrap-up event. And you can buy or lease any new vehicle now and get this year's best offers. Plus, we'll add in a $500 Visa gift card. That's on top of their already low, clear-cut prices and all manufacturer incentives. Hurry, the big year-end wrap-up ends January the 2nd. It's exclusive at #1 Cochran stores and Cochran.com. We'll be right back. The #1 Cochran Sports Showdown is brought to you by #1 Cochran, Go One Better, and by HIGHMARK, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Have a greater hand in your health.